Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. All praise is to the one God, the one who is the protector and the sustainer and the nourisher, the one who has given us everything that we have, the one who provides for us everything that we see, everything that we eat, everything that we drink, and the air that we breathe, the one who takes care of us in every way possible. To understand this life, we have to understand consciousness. To understand consciousness, we have to understand the levels of consciousness. It's interesting. In the first book that Bawa had published in the United States, it was called The Divine Luminous Wisdom That Dispels the Darkness. And the first chapter of that book describes the 7 levels of consciousness. And we need to be aware of the levels of consciousness to have an understanding of where we are in our progression as beings. Not all men are true men. Many men are animals with human faces. True man is internally different than animal man. Let's go through the levels of consciousness. There is sense, awareness, and intellect. Sense and awareness means that we sense and become aware of the circumstances around us. Intellect means that the mind then interfaces with sense and awareness and tries to find a solution to the dilemma. Sense and awareness could be that a baby has a blanket on its legs and he becomes aware of the fact that there's a blanket on it. He becomes aware that the blanket is giving off heat and making him too hot. And intellect kicks the blanket off. Animals have these levels. Animals have sense, awareness, and intellect. Now, what we should understand is that sense, awareness, and intellect are very self-centered. They are about ourselves and taking care of ourselves. They are about an egocentric self-business. True man transcends self. True man transcends egocentricity. True man is more than an animal who basically takes care of its own needs and maybe those needs of the ones closest to him, but hasn't entered into an understanding of the unity of existence. The 4th level of consciousness is called judgment. And this is when man looks at himself and begins to understand that he is basically taking care of himself and he is basically finding solutions to his dilemmas, and he's providing food for himself, he's providing shelter for himself, he's providing a spouse for himself, he's providing children for the world. But all of these things have to do with him. God isn't in the equation. Yet, man is told about God. Man hears about God. Man wants to understand God. And then in judgment, he begins to ask questions like, besides all of these things that I'm doing, somehow I got here. How did I get here? I don't know how I got here. I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't know where I'm going from here. I don't understand my place in existence. What is it? How did it occur? How is it maintained? And what is it that I have to do to understand the answers to these questions? And at this phase, wisdom will enter into the equation. But wisdom isn't such an easy thing to find. Wisdom can't be learned from books. Wisdom is brought about through nearness. Now, what does that mean? It means that to understand wisdom, to come into being in wisdom, to know about wisdom, wisdom has to be brought to you. And you have to have the wherewithal to realize it's being brought to you, and the wherewithal to take advantage of the fact that it's being brought to you. So wisdom comes through contact with wisdom. Wisdom comes through nearness. Near what? Near someone wise. So as we develop, as we begin to ask questions about our origin, as we set an intention to know about the truth about ourselves, the universe is set up in such a way that when you are ready to understand the answers to these questions, someone will be brought into your life to show you the answers to these questions. So if you have found someone who answers these questions for you, or who brings about resolution to your dilemmas, you should know that you've done something right in your life to bring you to that point. It happened to me when I was 27 and my wife was 26. We were given a phone call, and I had been looking for a teacher for a while, maybe about 4 years. And I got a call that said the teacher is in Philadelphia. And we got in the car and we went to see him. And at that time, he had just arrived in America in October of 1971. And we found out about him in March of 1972. He lived in a little room on the second floor of what in Philadelphia they call row houses, which are little houses that are approximately 18 feet wide that are all attached for an entire block. And they run the whole block, and they're 2 stories. And downstairs, there's a living room, dining room, and kitchen. And upstairs, there's usually 3 bedrooms, and a bathroom or 2. So we came to the house in Philly. We were brought in, and we were told that if we'd wait a minute, Bao would see us. And then we went up to Bao's room. And it was a small room with a single bed in it, a little 12-inch television in the corner that was playing Star Trek with the sound off. And we were sat down in front of Bao. And this was my encounter, my first encounter with wisdom, my first encounter with reality. I had known almost all my life that people didn't have real answers to the questions I wanted to ask. And even though they attempted to answer them, I could tell they had no idea what they were talking about, and these weren't real answers. The answers I was able to get in my formative years before I met Bao were essentially worldly answers, answers within the realm of illusion, how to go through your education, what to be educated in. And these things that you were told to be educated in all had a practical application to working within the world, to earning a living within the world. And by the time I met Bao, I had already gone through university and law school. And I already had my first job as a lawyer. But as a lawyer, I noticed that there were many pitfalls and many difficulties. I noticed that the law could be manipulated. As a matter of fact, lawyers were expected to manipulate the law in favor of their clients. And this caused some difficulty to my consciousness. So as I sat before him, I had a question, which was, how do you maintain your integrity as a lawyer? And he welcomed us. He offered us tea, if I remember right. And then he pointed to a stack of papers and asked one of the ladies in the room to read from those papers. And what he was reading, what she was reading, was about how a lawyer can maintain his integrity while practicing law. And it was all very simplistic. It was set the intention to hold on to your integrity. Don't allow yourself to do anything that's untoward. Realize what's right and what's wrong and stay within the realm of what's right. Don't exaggerate on behalf of your client in order to make it easier for him. Tell the truth. So, first place, I was astounded because I never asked the question, that the answer came to me. But while that was being read, as soon as it was finished, he looked at my wife and he said to her, "Do you want anything?" And she looked up at him. And at that time, she read palms. And she said to him, "May I read your palm?" And he looked at her and smiled and put his hand out like this. And she grabbed his hand and looked at it. And then she kissed his hand, started to cry, and ran out of the room, which I didn't take much notice of because I was sort of overwhelmed by the presence of what I was in front of. about 15 minutes later, somebody says to me, maybe you should see what your wife is doing. So I went downstairs, and she was there was a little porch on the outside of the house, and she was standing in the corner. She was still crying. And I asked her, I said, what happened? He said, well, when I touched his hand, it was like electricity ran through my entire body. And then when I looked at his hand, he had two parallel lifelines. And people don't have two parallel lifelines. The only ones who have two parallel lifelines are perfected beings, people who actually know who they are. And he had that. And that's when I just couldn't take it anymore, and I ran out of the room. That was my introduction to this man. My wife telling me he was a perfected being, and she saw it in his hand, and there is nobody like this. And him answering questions that I didn't ask, which were the questions I had in my mind. So I knew all of a sudden that I was with something extraordinary, with somebody who is outside of the realm of ordinary experience. And somehow I was thrust into his sphere. It's been 50 years now since I was thrust into his sphere, and my life has continuously revolved around what happens when you're thrust into that sphere, when you're thrust into the sphere of acknowledging that there is more to life than feeding yourself, clothing yourself, finding shelter, and obtaining the benefits of the world. When you learn that all of these things are secondary to truth, and you learn that your life as you see it in this world is only a representation of your life. Your real life is something else. Everybody thinks they are a body with a soul, but we're not. We're souls with a body. Our focus is on the wrong part of ourselves. Our focus is on the temporary as opposed to the eternal. And that's when you begin to learn that there is form and there is formlessness. And within formlessness, there are qualities which are eternal, which cannot be seen by the eye, heard by the ears, tasted or smelled. They're something else. So you begin to learn what these qualities are, and you learn about them in two ways. One way is you're told about them, and they're described to you. So you get a definition of the quality. That definition is explained, and that definition is taken on by your intellect. But secondly, you are then shown what that quality is like in action by watching the sheikh. These qualities are not words any longer. They are something that happens in real time, in reality. There's something that happens in interaction with the sheikh. And all of the interactions with the sheikh are about these qualities, because he is the manifestation in human form of these qualities. So that which is formless appears in form. Of course, it's in form for a specific period of time, and then that body disappears. But the qualities that that body acted on in life, the qualities that came forth from that being, don't disappear. They stay. And one of the miracles of the Sheikh is that the capacity that he has for these qualities, the integrated nature of these qualities into his being, can be passed on by him to the ones he contacts with. So wisdom comes to you through nearness. Through being with him, you see these qualities, and then if you are open, if you allow yourself to be open, these qualities enter into your being, and then you have them also. Because God is without limit. God's qualities are without limits. And as much as anyone takes into his heart or into his being, God is not diminished, nor is the Sheikh diminished, nor are the qualities diminished. They continue to flourish and grow within you. And then each of us, upon obtaining these qualities and bringing them into our beings, becomes carriers of these qualities. We then become the receptacle that obtained these qualities, and we now have the ability to pass them on through others through nearness, through interaction, through action with the rest of humanity. And this is how truth is passed on. This is how justice and mercy and compassion is passed on. This is how graciousness is passed on, one to one, one to another. Nearness. These qualities have the ability to jump from one person to another. And if one person is open to these qualities and understands these qualities, then there is a passage directly to you of these qualities, and there is a change in your being. And this is the beginning of wisdom. This is the beginning of understanding wisdom. So this is the fifth level of consciousness, when all of a sudden wisdom becomes the operative motive, the operative way that you act. Now, the difference between wisdom and the previous levels of consciousness is the previous levels of consciousness are all about duality. You and the rest of humanity are separate from each other. You have an obligation to yourself to do the best that you can for yourself and to take care of yourself. When you move into wisdom, you move in to God's qualities and the way God acts. And the way God acts is to give on behalf of humanity, to protect on behalf of humanity, to grace humanity, to supply humanity. So when we enter into wisdom, we begin to stop doing everything through self-motive. We begin to stop doing everything through what Bauer called self-business. All of a sudden, we understand our connection to the rest of humanity. We saw how the Sheikh gave to us. We saw the contentment that came over us while we were in the presence of that giving. We saw the peace that came over us when we were in an atmosphere where giving was the norm and where accepting others was the norm and where assisting others was the norm, as opposed to grabbing for the self. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody in front of the Sheikh understood this. For some people, all they understood was they were in front of something very special and they needed to get as close to that as they could. And if they had to push other people out of the way, they would. If they had to step on other people to get closer, they would. If they had to push people aside to get closer, they would. But this defeated the purpose of obtaining what it is the Sheikh had to give. He spent a lot of time teaching us what's known as adab, which is the appropriate way to act, the appropriate way to interact with brothers and sisters, the appropriate respect to have for brothers and sisters, the appropriate deference that we need to have for brothers and sisters. And as we develop the appropriate way of behaving, modesty, self-restraint, when we develop those qualities, we are then able to imbibe the other qualities of Allah. But as long as we maintain the qualities through the first three levels of consciousness, which have to do with arrogance, which have to do with self-serving, which have to do with advancing ourselves, then wisdom doesn't have room within us. Wisdom can't find a place within us because wisdom is a movement towards unity and away from duality. So you can say that the first three levels of consciousness are narcissistic. They're self-centered. They have to do with aggrandizing the self and making the self more. When you move into wisdom consciousness, you begin to realize that all of this self-centered, egocentric behavior is what's known as illusion, because there is no self, there is no self-centeredness, and all of that is just an attempt to make more out of something that doesn't really exist. And that's a very hard thing to grab hold of, because we see us, we touch us, we feel us, and then we're told, but you don't really exist. You are not what you appear to be. And then the understanding comes that you are more than what you appear to be. You are not just this body. You are a soul, and a soul has divinity in it. And you are from divinity, and it is your birthright to return to divinity. And as long as you hold on to that which isn't divine, as long as you hold on to that which is worldly, as long as you hold on to the mundane of everyday life, as long as you wallow in the mud of the dunya and call it heaven, you have misplaced your understanding of truth. You've misplaced your understanding of reality, and you've held yourself down from that which is possible for you. So the Sheikh told us on a continuous basis, become like me. The Sheikh told us that our birthright was to become like him. He explained to us that for us to truly enter into wisdom and divine consciousness, we have to leave the mundane, self-centered consciousness of this world. So mind and desire, which is the basis for worldly consciousness, have to disappear. Their influence has to dissipate. They can't be what drives us anymore. What drives us has to be Allah's qualities. Now, imagine for just a second that Allah is Rahman, and He allows you to share in Rahman. That Allah is Rahim, and He allows you to share in Rahim. That Allah is Kabir, Allah is patience, Allah is gratitude, Allah is graciousness, and He allows you to share in all of these things, which means that the divine has given you the ability to share in the divine and to take on the qualities of the divine and understand the nature of divinity. What greater gifts in the world is there than to share in Allah's divinity? It's greater than the elemental. Yet we hold the elemental, as the world holds the elemental, as all important. And it tries to acquire as much of the elements as it can. It tries to acquire gold. It tries to acquire gems. It tries to acquire the things that the world considers of importance and of value. But there comes a point where you understand that these things have no value. They are merely earth. They are merely glitters. But the true value of your life is that which is eternal, that which takes you to eternity. And what is it that takes you to eternity? Imbibing and acting out God's qualities. If you just learn the definitions, nothing has happened. But if you act out those qualities and bring into the world those qualities and allow those qualities to come forth from you, then you become a conduit for those qualities. And so Allah puts them in you and they go out from you to the rest of the world. Allah puts them in you and they go out from you to the rest of the world. And no matter how much of those qualities you give away, there's no diminishing them. So no matter how much mercy you give to the world, there's more mercy. No matter how much compassion you give to the world, there's more compassion. No matter how much justice you give into the world, there's more justice. There is no diminishing these qualities because Allah cannot be diminished. So take what you need and give as much as you can, because as you give, you will be given more, and you will be elevated more, and you will transcend more. You will come closer and closer to truth, closer and closer to our Lord. And these are the steps of wisdom. So you begin with the qualities, then you go into the action of the qualities. Then the beauty of the qualities will be seen within you. And then you will lose your attachment to the elemental world, and you will find that you are now attached to the qualities of Allah, the qualities of truth, the qualities that are everlasting, the qualities that are eternal. And then you become eternal because you've attached yourself to that which is eternal. And this is what Allah has always intended for you. This is what the Sheikh has always intended for you. This is your birthright. So we need to take what is truly ours. And what is truly ours is not the wealth of the world, but the wealth of Allah. And the wealth of Allah is his magnificent, gracious qualities. So may those qualities enter into all of our hearts. May they enter into all of our beings. And may they allow us to transcend this world and entered into the world of light, the world of truth, the world of God's kingdom. May that happen for each of us. Ameen. Ameen. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.